Hey folks, welcome back. Did I scare you? Oh my god, I'm so sorry. You never mentioned your heart condition. I never would have. Who doesn't love a good scare? Am I right, fellas? I love scary. You all know this. I'm a big fan of horror games, horror movies, horror shows. I'm sure I would enjoy the occasional horror novel if I was capable of paying attention to a book for more than a couple sentences. But there's nothing quite like a horror video game to get your spook on. You all know that I love Resident Evil, but the other franchise that I love just as much is Silent Hill. I love Resident Evil's brand of action horror, but I also love Silent Hill's brand of psychological horror. They complement each other, in my opinion. Now, unfortunately, Silent Hill is something of a shadow of its former self these days, but the first 4 games in the series are 4 of my favorites of all time and are hugely important in the grand scheme of horror video games. I did 1, I did 2, and we all know what comes after 2, right? It's 3. 3 comes after 2. Now I know what you're all thinking. Ben, where the hell you been? Your Silent Hill 2 video came out over a year ago. We've been waiting so long for you to cover Silent Hill 3. What gives? And here's the thing about Silent Hill 3. The reason that I've been so reluctant to make a video about it is because I don't like it that much. Okay, hear me out. Okay, to be fair, it's not entirely accurate to say that I don't like Silent Hill 3. I like it a lot. But give me some time to explain my stance on the game. Is that okay? Are you still mad? Don't be mad. Silent Hill is one of my favorite video game franchises, and by that I mean the first 4 games. I haven't actually even played anything past Silent Hill 4, but I have heard mostly not great things. Silent Hill 1 is a great game. Sure, it's got its flaws. Gameplay-wise, it's kind of an attempt to emulate Resident Evil in a lot of ways, and the story is, in my opinion, kind of whatever. But that's mostly down to a personal thing. I'm just simply not a huge fan of, like, demonic possession / occult / supernatural horror. I've always found psychological horror more appealing. But all that said, it's still an absolute classic and a really good game. The atmosphere is chilling, the characters are compelling, and it's technically very impressive for 1999. And it's also responsible for bringing psychological horror into video games, and for launching the careers of Akira Yamaoka, Keiichiro Toyama, Takayoshi Sato, and Masahiro Ito, among others. Overall, it's a fantastic game and a landmark for horror in video games. Silent Hill 2, on the other hand, is the best fucking video game ever made by anyone ever. Silent Hill 2 took the original Silent Hill and full force kicked it into the goddamn stratosphere. The visuals are refined, the music and sound design is perfect, the setting is creepier, the gameplay, well, it's pretty much the same, but the real selling point for Silent Hill 2 is the story. The establishment of Silent Hill as this purgatory inhabited by sinful people, each of whom experience the city differently. Not to mention the downfall of James Sunderland, it's perfect. Silent Hill 2 is not my favorite game, but in my humblest opinion, it is the best story ever told in a video game, horror or not. Last of Us, don't care. Uncharted, get out of my face. Nier Automata, I'm nearly fed up with all these games that aren't as good as Silent Hill 2. Here's where my stance on Silent Hill 3 comes in. It had to follow Silent Hill 2. Imagine if you went to a really good restaurant and ordered an appetizer and a main dish. The appetizer is fucking amazing. It's the best food you've ever eaten. And then you get the main dish and it's really good. It's still one of the best things you've ever eaten. But it just doesn't compare to Silent Hill 2, the appetizer. You see what I'm getting at? Basically, Silent Hill 2 was kind of an impossible act to follow. With the benefit of hindsight, I probably would have played 1, 3, and then 2. But you know what? It's been a couple years since I played Silent Hill 3. So you know what? This time I'm going to go into it with a clean slate. Nothing to influence my opinion except for the game itself. Also, just a warning, this video is going to contain spoilers for Silent Hill 1, 2, and 3, and also to a lesser extent Jacob's Ladder. So if you don't want any of that spoiled, there's the door. Arthur, where's the door? There's the door. It's unprofessional. So, Silent Hill 3 was developed by good old Team Silent, may they rest in peace, and published by everybody's favorite video game company, Konami. Some homies making the return in this game are, of course, Akira Yamaoka on the music and sound design, and Hiroyuki Iwaku and Masahiro Ito reprising their roles from the previous games as scenario writer and art director respectively, among others. Making his debut, however, was Kazuhide Nakazawa as the main director. Nakazawa would go on to have a big role in the development of Metal Gear Solid 4, so trust me, this guy knows what he's doing. It was released on my birthday, August 5th, 2003, 2 years after Silent Hill 2 came out. Unlike Silent Hill 2, which was a completely new story with pretty much nothing to do with the original aside from setting, Silent Hill 3 is a direct sequel to the first game, and for that reason it's probably a good idea that we recap the events of the first game so that we have an idea of what the f*** is going on here. Silent Hill follows Harry Mason, a normal guy with normal pants who, during a drive with his daughter Cheryl to the eponymous town, swerves to avoid a little girl and gets into a car crash. He wakes up in a diner with 100% less daughter than he had previously. He also finds that Silent Hill is foggy, snowing out of seasons, seemingly abandoned, and full of monsters. So it becomes his goal to traverse the hellscape to find Cheryl. During his adventure, he meets Dahlia Gillespie, a crazy old cult leader lady who fills him in that the town is being consumed by darkness and transforming into the nightmare of her daughter, Alessa. 7 years before the events of the game, Dahlia used Alessa as a vessel, or I guess you could say an Alessal. Dahlia used Alessa in a ritual to birth the deity of their cult, the Order. Alessa survived the immolation, doomed to be rendered immortal, but she was left with third-degree burns all over her body. Her resistance to the ritual also split her soul in half, with one half manifesting as Harry's adoptive daughter, Cheryl. So in order to complete the ritual, Dahlia lures Cheryl into the town and successfully uses her to birth the deity. The game has 4 endings, but in the good ending, which is logically the canon ending, Harry defeats the deity, and Alessa, having been exorcised out of it, gives Harry an infant reincarnation of hers and Cheryl's soul, which he then raises on his own. Silent Hill 3 takes place 17 years later and stars Harry's daughter, Heather Mason, who, spoiler, although it's pretty fucking obvious, is the girl given to Harry at the end of the first game. So at this point, you should probably be able to piece together why I didn't initially respond that well to Silent Hill 3. Obviously, it had the unfortunate task of being made to follow up Silent Hill 2, but it was also a sequel to the first game, and if you've been paying attention, you'll be able to tell that supernatural horror isn't exactly my slice of ghosts, demonic possessions, rituals. I don't know, that stuff just doesn't quite appeal to me as much as other forms of horror. I like a good supernatural horror movie now and again, but I don't know, ghosts and the occult just don't really scare me that much. I'm much more interested in psychological horror. But horror isn't just about being scared. If that was the case, then every horror movie would just be Saw or Paranormal Activity or Final Destination or whatever. And that's obviously not the case. You got rubber. I think that's enough background. Let's get into the events of Silent Hill 3. The game opens up with Heather at the Lakeside Amusement Park, after hours, baby, and it's full of monsters. She climbs onto the roller coaster tracks and fucking dies. The end. Now you can see why I don't like this one that much. No, I'm just kidding. It was all a nightmare. Heather finds herself asleep in a burger joint in a mall. She then gets approached by this dude, Detective Douglas Cartland, who tells her that he needs to talk with her about her birth. She understandably tells him to fuck off, and then we get to explore the mall. If you examine the mirror at the beginning, Heather says that she doesn't like mirrors because she sees the person looking back at her as some kind of imposter. Write that down, it's important for later. This sequence also plays probably my favorite song in the entire game, End of Small Sanctuary. Anyway, later on, Heather ends up in a clothing store and finds a big monster munching on a person, so she fills it full of lead. Fun fact, the person on the ground here is actually Angela from Silent Hill 2. Not canonically, but it's the same model. Heather later on meets Claudia Wolf, the main antagonist of the game. Claudia is a high-up member of the Order, the cult that did the whole sacrificing Alessa to birth a god thing, and her main goal is to use Heather to repeat the ritual. She tells Heather to remember her true self, and then, just like in the first 2 games, the mall converts into the Otherworld counterpart, a nightmarish hellscape that uses the same layout but is considerably more fucked up. After exploring the Otherworld mall, Heather fights a big penis worm monster. And no, I'm not just being crass, trust me, it's important for later. The mall goes back to normal and we meet up with Douglas. Turns out that Claudia hired Douglas to bring Heather to her. But other than that, he's as in the dark about everything that's going on as Heather is. We go through a subway where more wacky stuff happens, and eventually we end up in an office building. This is a minor point, but I really like the way that the camera switches here to show Heather from the inside of the building. It's such a subtle way of making the player feel on edge. It's like we're suddenly seeing from the perspective of some creep who's watching her from the other side of the window. Heather finds a bathtub that fills up with blood, and it converts the office building to the Otherworld office building. It's here that we meet Vincent Smith, a creepy creeper dude who kinda toes the line between good guy and bad guy. He's clearly not a good guy, but he also seems to hate Claudia and refers to Dahlia Gillespie as a hag, so take that, Dahlia, you wretched bitch. He also refers to Dahlia as Heather's mother, so he clearly knows everything. Obviously, Heather doesn't trust him.
I knew you were on her side.
How do you figure?
There's something wrong with you too.
We eventually make it back to our apartment to find Harry murdered as f***. Heather notices that her sliding door is open, so she heads up to the roof to find Claudia, who has obviously just killed her dad. Claudia explains that she killed Harry for 2 reasons. First, because he ruined the original birth ritual 17 years before, and also to fill Heather with hatred, to lure her to Silent Hill so that she can make her birth a god. Also, the whole time we haven't been in Silent Hill, we've been, a different town. I didn't mention that, but it's that neither do they. So she also says that she didn't actually kill Harry, but instead gave the order to this guy, the missionary, who she tells to attack Heather. She then tells Heather that she'll be waiting for her in Silent Hill. Boss fight time, and then Heather goes downstairs to find Douglas in her apartment. Weird, creepy, weird. She tells him that she wants to go to Silent Hill to kill Claudia, and he offers to drive her. He also says that Vincent stopped by while Heather was upstairs and told him to find a guy named Leonard, who's at the Brookhaven Mental Institution in Silent Hill. On the way there, Heather fills in Douglas on all the shenanigans that happened 17 years ago that led to her birth, which she found out in a notepad that Harry was holding when he died. So the next area is a hospital, because of course it is. This is a Silent Hill game. There has to be at least one hospital level. One thing that is kind of neat is that throughout the hospital there are these letters written to Heather by a guy named Stanley, who's clearly obsessed with her. Weird, bro. She's a teenager. The kind of strange thing about this is that it doesn't really have much of anything to do with the main plot. In fact, you can completely miss this whole Letters from Stanley side quest if you don't examine the first one. So anyway, Heather eventually finds and kills Leonard, who is much more demon-y than she expected, and for her troubles, she gets a little emblem with the order symbol on it. Heather goes back to her and Douglas's hotel room to find no Douglas and one Vincent. He tells her that Douglas is at the church, and that she has to go through the amusement park to get to it. And so, we go back to the amusement park from Heather's nightmare, although this time we can avoid getting killed by the roller coaster. Before leaving the amusement park, we have a fight on the carousel with a boss called Memory of Alessa, who's basically Heather with black hair, even down to the clothes. After that, we go to the last area, the church. Here, Vincent informs us that the reason he wanted us to get the seal of Megatron, or whatever it's called, is because he thought it would stop the birth ritual. It doesn't stop the birth ritual. After the church, Claudia kills Vincent and attempts to use Heather to birth the god. However, Heather swallows the Alcaphotis, the little bead necklace that Harry gave her, and it causes the god to be stillborn. Claudia then eats the fucking fetus, turning herself into this Alessa-looking god monster thing, which is the final boss. After that, there are 3 endings. The normal ending, where Heather makes a joke about killing Douglas, and then tells him to call her Cheryl. The possessed ending, where Heather kills Douglas, and the joke ending, which involves aliens, as usual. And that's every goddamn thing that happens in Silent Hill 3. But we're not finished yet. We're not even close. Now, I am eventually going to take you on a field trip to Analysis Town, so I hope you got your permission slips. But before we go there, I want to talk about the gameplay and atmosphere and, the boring stuff, before I start blowing your mind with my symbolic analysis. So Silent Hill 3 is a video game, right? Heather can't kill Claudia on her own, okay? She needs a little bit of help from you and those button-pushing fingers you got there. As a game, Silent Hill 3... it's exactly the same as the first 2. It's clearly made in the same engine as Silent Hill 2. The items look the same, the menus look the same, the sound effects are the same. It even reuses some assets from Silent Hill 2. And that's not inherently a bad thing. Lots of games reuse assets and engines and are still good. Every Resident Evil game that's come out since Resident Evil 7 has used the RE engine, and it doesn't take away from the experience at all. And that's also how I feel about Silent Hill 3. It doesn't feel lazy at all. At no point did I think this is just Silent Hill 2 reskinned. Besides, the whole bloop bloop that the menu makes feels more like an iconic feature of the Silent Hill series rather than an attempt to cut corners. But anyway, like I said, gameplay-wise, it's basically the same as Silent Hill 1 and 2. It's got tank controls, auto-aim with weapons, a quick turnaround by pressing L1 and R1 at the same time. Much like its predecessors, the environments are made entirely in-engine, rather than the pre-rendered backgrounds of its big brother Resident Evil. This means that you do have control over the camera, although it is limited. If you press R2, the camera will whoosh around you to show you what's in front of you, and if you hold it, it'll stay there, although it's not super reliable. You can also zoom in by holding R2 and pressing down on the left stick, something that the game doesn't tell you at any point. I think the shitty camera controls are kind of intentional to a certain extent to make it scarier. Certain parts of the game use fixed camera angles as a way to add to the horror. And Silent Hill 3 is fun. The appeal comes more from exploration and puzzles. The series has never exactly been known for its gameplay. That said, though, I really think they could have done more with the gameplay here. How are you guys out here in 2003 still using tank controls? Yeah, I like tank controls, but I'm the only person on the planet who does. And plus the camera controls... Come on, guys. I really don't think it would have taken much away from the experience if this game had a more traditional control scheme with a third-person perspective and freedom to manipulate the camera. And also the combat is pretty lame, which honestly isn't that big a deal, but I still think that they could have changed it a bit. I mean, you're not really supposed to fight the monsters, the game kind of conditions you to avoid fighting them because they take so many hits. But even still, after 2 games, you would think that the combat would be a little bit more engaging. I mean, the boss fights are pretty lame. You just wait for them to become vulnerable and then you shoot them until they're dead, even the final boss. And yes, I know, Silent Hill isn't about the gameplay, it's more about the storytelling and atmosphere, but you can still strike a balance between the two things. Much like the first 2 games, Heather will tilt her head to look at items that can be picked up. I like this a lot because Silent Hill is all about immersion. There's no heads-up display, the only thing that ever really comes onto the screen is text. And because of this, a little sparkle or an arrow pointing at an item or something just wouldn't make sense in a game like this. I hear a butt coming. However, okay, well, yeah, just make me look like an asshole in front of all my viewers and friends and stuff. One thing that is very annoying about this game that is not present in the previous 2 is that Heather looks at doors that she can open. She even does this when she's inside a room, like, yes, Heather, I know that I can go through that door, I used it to get in here. The reason I hate this is because so often Heather will be clearly distracted by something and I'll think, what are you looking at? Did I miss an item? But I didn't, she's just staring at the fucking door like a dumbass. Hell, sometimes Heather will be looking at an item and I'll miss it because I assume she's just looking at the door. To stray away from the negativity though, the atmosphere in Silent Hill 3 is immaculate. Visually, it's the best in the series in my opinion. Obviously not graphically, but the way that everything looks. The other worlds of Silent Hill 3 are so visceral and creepy. There are parts where the walls start breathing and changing and it just makes you want to get the hell out of there as soon as possible. Like obviously you have no way of knowing whether or not something bad is going to happen, but are you really willing to stick around and find out? It's true that Silent Hill as a series was largely influenced by Adrian Lynn's 1990 psychological horror movie Jacob's Ladder, but in my opinion, nowhere is that influence more evident than in Silent Hill 3. The entire subway sequence of the game is very reminiscent of the beginning of the movie. Many of the visuals throughout the game play tribute to the movie, monsters coming out of the walls and the wheelchair with the spinning wheel. But most of all, the scene near the beginning where Heather is going down the elevator into the first game's Otherworld sequence is shot so similarly to the scene in Jacob's Ladder, where Jacob is being pushed on a stretcher through the hospital and he hallucinates an insane asylum. I've said before that I have a really thick skin when it comes to being scared, but multiple times throughout this game genuinely sent a shiver down my spine. For example, there's a room in the Otherworld Brookhaven Hospital where you walk in and are met by a giant mirror. Suddenly, you're locked in the room and you have no choice but to stand there and watch as these black and red tendrils start filling the room and climbing up Heather's reflection, who eventually is frozen in place and stops following you. God, I hated this when I first saw it, but I also loved it. I'm a strange guy. This comes out of absolutely fucking nowhere and hits you with no prompt. There was no way to see this coming. In my opinion, it's by far the scariest thing that happens in the entire Silent Hill series, and it gets 2 big old thumbs up from yours truly. And yeah, I could go on, but we got bigger fish to fry here. This is Silent Hill we're talking about, okay? Nothing is real. Everything is a metaphor for something. So what do you say we get down to the bottom of it? And before you comment, yeah, obviously I didn't come up with all of this on my own. I'm not that smart. I will admit that I took a few hundred trips to the Silent Hill wiki in researching for this video. But with all that said, get on your analysis pants, because we're going to do some analysizing. Look, I'm a stupid hipster, alright? I like disgusting craft beer, I like dumbass streetwear, I like weird modern art, but most of all, I love pretentious symbolic storytelling. That's my favorite thing about Silent Hill. Each game is abundant with symbolism and largely interpretive narrative themes. Silent Hill 1 was arguably the least symbolic of the first 3 games, but it was designed around the story of Alessa being abused by her mother during her life and during the birthing ritual. Silent Hill 2, on the other hand, is about guilt, sin, sexual immorality, punishment, and neglect. And Silent Hill 3... well, it's a little complicated. I think the lack of symbolism in the first game in comparison to the second, coupled with the fact that Silent Hill 3 is a direct sequel to the first game, is part of the reason why I initially kind of wrote this game off. But upon replaying it, I can see how much of a fucking idiot I was, because Silent Hill 3 has so much going on under the surface. Another thing I realized during my second playthrough is what this game is actually about. At its core, Silent Hill 3 is a game about maternity and growing up as a girl. I hope you can all forgive me for not being able to relate to that Much like its predecessor, the main protagonist of Silent Hill 3 has a huge impact on the events and the plot of the game. Like I said earlier, Heather is a reincarnation of the combined soul of Alessa Gillespie and Cheryl Mason, and because of this, Heather has all of Alessa and Cheryl's memories, although they're suppressed and only come out as dreamlike visions. That is until later in the game when she's able to remember everything. And a lot of the symbolism in the game has to do with Heather being this sort of amalgamation of three different souls. Over the course of the game, Heather is forced to come to terms with who she truly is, and that plot really ties into the first theme of this game, maturity / adolescence / growing up as a girl. This is the one I can relate to the best. Sure, I was never a teenage girl, but I was a teenager. We're all teenagers at one point. Maybe you currently are a teenager, and if you aren't a teenager yet, stop watching this video. It's inappropriate for kids. Being a teenager sucks. We all know this. Nobody takes you seriously. Nobody listens to you. You're going through all these weird physical and emotional changes. You're suddenly hyper aware and concerned about how everyone around you perceives you. Adults treat you like a kid, but they expect you to behave like an adult, and you don't even know how to be an adult. And I feel like it's almost a metaphor for adolescence and growing into an adult. When I think about myself as a teenager, I remember a nervous, self-conscious kid who was obsessed with aesthetics. The way I dressed, the way I presented myself, the way I behaved, my fucking hair. All of this was influenced primarily by this vague goal to fit in with what everyone else thought was cool. I didn't know who I was. No teenager knows who they are. They're just kids. You've only been on this earth for 15 years. How the fuck could you possibly have any idea what kind of person you are? But then you finish high school and it suddenly hits you. None of that shit mattered at all. Everybody you know and everybody whose opinion you cared so much about is gone and off doing their own shit. You start to realize that you don't have to fit into some hole in the wall, some niche personality type. You're your own person. And yeah, I know what you're thinking. Ben, what the hell are you going on about? Why are you ranting about high school? You graduated nearly a decade ago. Yeah, don't remind me, okay? But it's connected, trust me. The events of Silent Hill 3 depict Heather going from a child to a teenager to an adult. At the beginning, she's in the child phase. She's just a snippy, back-talking teenage girl who loves nothing more than going to the mall. And look, I'm not even being sexist. Heather liked Go Mall. It's right here in the manual. And then as the game goes along, she learns more about this burden that she was born into. You could call this the teenager phase. She's conflicted. She doesn't really know who she is or who she should be. She's split between these three different identities. And by the end of the game, Heather has reached the maturity phase. She has come to terms with who she is. She's no longer angry or resentful because she accepts her identity as Heather, Cheryl, and Alessa. But enough vague talk. Let's look at some examples of what I'm talking about. The early childhood phase, not early childhood, but early childhood, doesn't have a lot of concrete examples because it's kind of how Heather is before the game. She's just at the mall, hanging out, being a teen. Smell you later, Dad. I'm gonna go take the subway home. All by myself. Although one thing I do like is that the save point in the game is the symbol of the order, which causes Heather to have a sort of deja vu type reaction since she's seen it, but in one of her past lives. Let me tell you, it's a lot more interesting than the notepads of Silent Hill 1 or the iconic non-specific red squares of Silent Hill 2. But most of the game is spent during the teenager symbolic phase, where Heather is forced to try and figure out who she really is based on memories that she can't immediately access. One of my favorite examples is in the Otherworld Brookhaven Hospital when Heather finds a payphone in a locker. She answers it and then this creepy guy starts singing happy birthday to her, despite her insisting that it's not her birthday.
Happy birthday, dear. Oh, I forgot your name.
Who are you?
Oh, okay, thanks. Happy birthday, dear. Who are you?
Now, this might come off as just like a stupid joke, a hi hungry I'm dad type situation, but I think it's more than that. Referring to Heather as who are you is kind of fitting. Is she Alessa, is she Cheryl, or is she Heather? He also says happy 31st birthday, and then later says that it's her 24th birthday, which are both wrong because, as we know, Heather is 17. But the reason he actually says this is because at the time of Silent Hill 3, Alessa would have been 31 years old and Cheryl would have been 24. Heather also later finds a birthday card that says happy 38th birthday and posits that 14 plus 7 plus 17 is 38. 14, Alessa's age at the time of Silent Hill 1, plus 7, Cheryl's age when she was sacrificed in the birthing ritual, plus 17, Heather's current age, equals 38. So there you go. It's like someone's trying to tell her that she's three different people rolled into one. Mirrors also play a huge role in depicting Heather as a self-conscious teenager while also alluding to Alessa and Cheryl. She says at the beginning that she doesn't like mirrors because she sees the person looking back at her to be an imposter. I mean, duh, this is alluding to images of self-image. What could be more symbolic of the insecurities of a teenage girl than a fear of mirrors? And of course, it's also a little bit of cheeky foreshadowing that Heather is the reincarnation of Alessa and Cheryl. in a way, she is an imposter. I also think that the boss fight with the memory of Alessa in the theme park is important because it signifies Heather's transition from the confused teenager phase into the mature adult phase. By finally killing the memory of Alessa, Heather has accepted Alessa as part of herself, and from this point on in the game, Heather's personality changes from a scared, confused kid to a confident, ass-kicking young woman. Throughout the final area of the game, the church, it's made evident that Heather remembers everything about Alessa's life. She sees a picture of Alessa and says, "It's a picture of me as a child." She reminisces about memories of growing up with Claudia, which Alessa did. And during the final cutscene, when Claudia refers to her repeatedly as Alessa, she doesn't get upset or correct her because she's accepted Alessa as part of herself. She also shows her maturity by basically saying "F you" and swallows the red thing to prevent the ritual from being completed. Basically, all that summed up is that Silent Hill is a game about girl power. Who among us can't relate? Am I right, ladies? Okay, I'm trying my best here. Like, what do you want me to do? Pretend to be a girl? Now, don't start packing up your stuff yet. I'm not finished talking. Adolescence and growing up is one of the two major themes in Silent Hill 3. Or at least one of the two major themes that revolve primarily around Heather. The other major theme is maternity and childbirth, which kind of go hand in hand, so we'll just put them together nicely in a nice little package. Obviously, since the events of the game happen as a result of Heather's supposed destiny to give birth to the god of the order, a lot of the symbolism in the game has to do with childbirth, motherhood, pregnancy, abortion, etc. The designs of the monsters are a good example of this. The missionary boss, as well as the later scraper monsters, carry giant versions of medical equipment and are wearing big long surgical gloves. In my opinion, these guys are intended to represent themes of abortion and miscarriage, which I'm just gonna leave at that because it's kind of a bummer. The insane cancer monsters are these giant fat monsters that I personally believe represent both an unwanted growth inside the body and the fear that a lot of women have about how pregnancy will change their body physically. I think this is doubly evident by the fact that these guys have big areas of loose skin on both of their inner thighs, a common thing that happens when someone loses a bunch of weight or, say, gives birth to a child. I also think it's important to note that the loose skin is on their legs because it's a lot more common for women to gain weight on their thighs than it is for men. A lot of the monsters also resemble sexual imagery. Sorry, Mom and Dad. The big worm boss can be interpreted as phallic in design, or also resembling childbirth. These little guys kind of look like sperm cells. The closer monsters just straight up have vaginas on their face. Some people are like, it's a mouth. No, it's not. Come on now. And there are also other little references to childbirth present in the game. One example I like is the bathtub in the office building that fills with blood before converting to the other world. I think this is probably a visual reference to home birth, where some mothers will choose to give birth to their baby in a bathtub. And obviously there's more, and I know what it is. I don't feel like telling you right now. So there you go. A whole lot of fun symbolism about forced childbirth. But before we go, let's get down to a verdict. How do I feel about Silent Hill 3? It's good. Upon playing it a second time, I can honestly say that Silent Hill 3 is a very special game. I said at the beginning that the main reason I didn't care much for Silent Hill 3 was because I had played 2 so recently before it. But upon replaying it, I figured out the other reason. It's because I didn't get it. At the time, Silent Hill 3 seemed like nothing more than simply a sequel to the first game. And the first game's themes of demonic possession and reincarnation and stuff, while interesting, just didn't appeal to me as much as Silent Hill 2's psychological brand of horror. But now I see Silent Hill 3 for what it is, a game about being a young girl who is forced to grow up before she's ready to. Heather Mason is a criminally underrated character in my opinion. To the casual observer, she probably comes off as your standard teenage girl. One might even dislike her for being stereotypical in a lot of ways. Like, I mean, throughout most of the game, she's sarcastic and argumentative. Like, no thanks, Mom. Brad's taking me to the dance whether you like it or not. In reality, though, Heather is so much more than that. She struggles with an identity crisis. She's made to feel responsible for something that happened before she was even born. She loses her father and is forced to move on way faster than anyone should have to. But despite all the hardships and garbage thrown at her in such a short period of time, Heather says, "F it. I'm not gonna let some birthing ritual destroy the world, and I'm sure as hell not going to let it define who I am." Honestly, how many other characters would find out that their entire identity has been this confusing mess of two different people and just be like, yeah, well, what are you gonna do about it? Call me Alessa, I don't care. Put simply, she's one of the strongest female characters ever, and I absolutely love her. Plus, she can turn into a magical girl, so that's pretty cool, I guess. And there you have it, folks, my unintentional Women's History Month video. Silent Hill 3 is such a special game, and it has so much more to say than I initially gave it credit for. I definitely still think that Silent Hill 2 is the best in the series, but after replaying it, I can honestly say that I think Silent Hill 3 is a close second. In the end, I give Silent Hill 3 an M for mature.